really want to, I guess, start by thanking CloudResearch for including us in this program. This is an exciting day. We're excited to see all the research that's going on in this area, and thanks for CloudResearch for working tirelessly on tools that have made our lives easier throughout the years. Also want to thank my colleagues Scott Burton and Chris Berry, especially Chris, who's joined us from Colorado, so he's up early to help me present our work. So we designed this presentation to keep it a bit on the shorter side. So love to hear some discussion about our work. So we're going to present data from a couple different studies, and the title here is "Drivers of Data Quality in Social Science Research: Differences Across MTurk and Professional Panel Samples." So just kind of a 30,000 foot view of our motivation for the research in this area. Sorry, we think obviously we think data quality is important. Okay, and even now, not enough researchers in our minds are paying attention to data quality and especially taking precautions and strategies to ensure data quality. So. At the beginning, when we became interested in this research, we kind of stumbled upon the stream of research. Early on, we were mainly concerned with the quality of crowdsourced data, but as we tested and confirmed crowdsourced data quality, we just kind of by default used the same strategies as we were, partnering with various different professional panels. We partner with many vendors for specialized samples, including Research Now, Kantar, Ipsos, Lightspeed, Nielsen, Qualtrics, et cetera. And what we found, kind of by accident, I think, is that, and we were troubled by the lack of quality of the expensive data that we were sourcing from the professional marketing research firms, the professional panel providers. And it made us think more broadly about the implications of data quality for the scientific community at large and the advancement of science broadly. So if researchers are not concerned with data quality, if they're not taking precautions and strategies to ensure data quality, we started to wonder, how many effect sizes are being underestimated, how many spurious relationships are being reported as a result of data, questionable data quality, how many good projects have been abandoned and scrapped completely because of lack of effects due to data quality. So, we view this as a significant threat to knowledge creation and social science research, and then especially for the work that we do around public health and public policy. So at the end of the day, we were interested in what strategies can we help to develop to inform best practices for social science researchers. So our first study here that we published in 2017. This was in the Journal of Advertising. We feel like we did a pretty good job, made a pretty convincing argument that the quality of crowdsourced data can be really good relative to some other sources, including professional panel data. This article got a good bit of attention. It's been cited 750 times, which is pretty strong for the Journal of Advertising. Joe, who's on the call, Goodman has experienced kind of the same thing on a much larger scale with this 2013 article. So I think there is an appetite for this kind of work in academia in terms of looking at data quality. So, critiques of it's interesting. Critiques of crowdsourced data have kind of come full circle in our minds. So early on, MTurk was critiqued as misunderstood and bad. Then, at least in marketing, it felt like we went through a period where it's been kind of widely adopted and accepted. But now again, it seems like it's come under fire. And I'm interested to hear actually about what Joe has to say about this in his talk. So I'll turn it over to Chris. He's going to present data from a couple of different studies. We're interested here in examining and exploring potential data quality differences for online crowdsourced panel sources versus professional online panels, and whether these differences affect results and implications. And examining the underlying mechanisms, importantly, that impact data quality. So we're looking at things such as effort, satisfaction, and multitasking. So at the end of the day, collectively, we kind of have arrived at almost, all data sourced online can be questionable, but we also think that most of it can be pretty good when the right strategies are in place, and that's kind of what we're working towards. So
perfect. So yeah, as Jeremy mentioned, Jeremy, Scott, and myself, we do a lot of work in the area of marketing and public policy and in food labeling. So a natural place to start for us was in a food labeling experiment. So we ran this between subjects experiment, and in this study, what we did was we manipulated front of package labeling such that you can see 3 different labels here. You can see the stimuli I was referencing here on the right-hand side with front of package stimuli. So we had these 3 different conditions here. And what we did was we ran this study where we kept the design consistent across 2 separate sources. So we ran this with a Qualtrics sample, and this is just a traditional river sample like you would get if you first called Qualtrics. And then we compared this with a CloudResearch approved MTurk sample. So we used a 90% approval rating. It was a CloudResearch approved sample, and then we left the normal data quality checks in place that are the default options in CloudResearch. So again, all manipulations, measures, instructions, and procedures, et cetera, were consistent across these 2 samples. And then we looked at outcomes that were suggested by theory to be related to these manipulations. And we wanted to see if these effects would be consistent across these 2 samples. And we also examined objective knowledge measures that we thought would be related to effort. So we looked at objective nutrition knowledge as well as numeracy. And the idea is that not only should these measures be capturing objective knowledge, but they should also be related to overall effort, because it takes some effort to accurately respond to these. Just want to present these findings, and for sake of time, I'm not going to get too far into the weeds, but I just want to point you kind of overall at what the big picture takeaways were here. So we ran this across these outcomes of saturated fat evaluation, sodium evaluation, overall nutrition, heart disease risk, as well as purchase intention. You can see some main effects of the disclosures as well as main effects of the sample source. So you see, these evaluations differing across the sample. But what's most interesting to us is that you find this disclosure by sample source interaction for 4 out of our 5 outcomes. And again, I won't present the interaction plots because there would be several here, but just as an overview, what we found was that the Chilean stop sign style warning that we predicted to be the strongest, that effect was actually accentuated for the CloudResearch sample. And in some cases, the effect was actually non-significant for the Qualtrics sample. So in other words, the big picture takeaways here are that we're finding differences in these effects across samples. We dug a little deeper and looked at objective knowledge here. And so we have objective nutrition knowledge as well as numeracy, as I mentioned. And again, these summated scores should be also reflect the effort that participants were putting in. Found an overall significant MANOVA result such that objective knowledge was higher for both nutrition knowledge as well as numeracy for the CloudResearch approved samples. So this CloudResearch approved sample was performing better on these objective knowledge measures. So again, effects aren't consistent across the sources, and these variations, importantly, could result in substantive conclusions or differences in substantive conclusions that could impact the policy literature, the marketing literature, overall really policy making more broadly. So the source matters, of course, for online data collection. And so we're going to argue that, strong controls and attention checks are needed. But then what we did is we want to take a look at the drivers or the potential mediators of these effects for online data collection efforts. And so we ran another study. This was a 2x2 between subjects experiment. This was actually a replication of a study that a couple of us ran several years ago. And we ran this with 5 different sources now. So we expanded this beyond simply Qualtrics and CloudResearch approved. And we ran this for, again, Qualtrics, but we also included Kantar, so a consumer panel. We ran it again with the CloudResearch approved MTurk participants, same 90% approval rating and the checks in place. We also included a CloudResearch prime panel sample. And finally, just as a baseline, MTurk with no approval rating or screening at all. So just a quick MTurk sample. And we developed some measures based on prior literature of satisficing multitasking and effort. And what we wanted to do is see if these measures were indeed the drivers overall of data quality. And to assess data quality in this study, we actually used an index of 4 measures that we've used in the past. We actually originally drew these measures from Qualtrics back for that 2017 paper. These were measures that Qualtrics recommended using for attention checks back then. And so we created the fourth one we actually came up with as well. So we created a summated score here for this quality index. Just a quick look at these measures. 6-item measure of survey satisficing. It was a 3-item measure of effort and a 3-item measure of multitasking. And we developed these using a pilot study to assess these multi-item measures before we use them here in this focal study. I know there's a lot going on in this table, so I'm just going to kind of point you through some of these basic conclusions, but we looked at some measures of participant involvement to look at how they differed across the sample. So this first sample here is the CloudResearch approved, so we call this an MTurk vetted sample versus a standard non-vetted MTurk sample. And then you have prime panels, Qualtrics, and Kantar across the top. You can see we assessed time. We looked at, like, for example, time reading the article. So we presented them with an article that was, again, included in this original study. And you can see that the CloudResearch approved sample spent more time reading the article. They also responded to open-ended questions using more characters. As far as that numeracy index, so that was an objective measure of numeracy. They performed better overall on the numeracy index. And then our new measures of satisficing, multitasking, and effort, you can see that the CloudResearch approved sample reported less satisficing, less multitasking, and overall greater effort put into the survey. And then also performed overall at a higher level on this attention check index that I mentioned previously. So we ran this as an overall mediation model, and what we were expecting is that if there's differences in the source that are driving satisficing should in turn extend to multitasking and effort, which in turn should drive data quality. And that's what we found overall, such that you find these sample differences that are replicating the differences as I showed you on the previous slide. And then you have an overall positive effect of the satisficing construct on multitasking and a negative influence on effort. And then in turn, these variables were related to attention check quality, such that there was a negative relationship between multitasking and data quality, and then there was a positive relationship between effort and data quality with a relatively high R-square there. So just taking it back to a conceptual level, here's what we were expecting, and here's ultimately what we found. We found differences in sample sources in terms of their satisficing behavior. And then this in turn influenced effort, multitasking, and had downstream effects on data quality. So just some high level takeaways. Of course, we found differences in data quality, but importantly, we think that these could drive differences in conclusions that are reported in the literature and have implications for various fields, and in our field, marketing and public policy. We believe that these measures that we developed and published recently in the Journal of Advertising could be used to assess data quality and could be used as influencers or drivers of data quality. We found support for these mediating roles, as I mentioned. And moving forward, though, I think we could consider using these mechanisms as covariates in future research. You could think about measuring satisficing, multitasking, and effort and potentially controlling for them or using them as covariates. And considering ultimately moving forward, we're thinking about how these effects could be minimized. So are there interventions or things that we could use to actually minimize the effects of these data quality drivers? And then also thinking in our realm, if these mechanisms extend to other policy related variables. So given those differences that we found for objective knowledge measures, there's a number of objective knowledge measures that are used in our body of work. And we're thinking, okay, if we're finding differences here, those could also drive differences in conclusions. So we want to further examine those.
First off, I just want to say thanks to my co-author, Scott Wright, and other co-authors that I've worked on this research over the years, but I have a couple of chapters with Scott. There's one that's forthcoming and we're in the final proofs right now that looks at some of this data. Some of this other data, though, like I said, is new as well. So thanks to Scott, this is definitely a collaboration with him. So he could be doing this too. I'll talk a little bit about COVID in terms of timing and what things have changed in terms of academic perceptions of online panel research in marketing, changes in usage, changes in perceptions of quality. I'll talk a little bit about TikTok and bots, but I think there's a lot of other good resources out there. I'm not really the expert on that. And then just kind of close out with crowdsourcing 2.0 or 3.0, wherever we're at, or kind of moving forward, where should we be at? And I think that might tee up Efron's talk as well, following me about kind of like where are we at and going and going forward. So, and I always try to work in Homer Simpson into a talk, so this seemed to be a good place for that to fit. So mission accomplished. All right, so this is the obligatory slide saying that COVID changed humans and research in the world. You know, millions are unemployed, millions needed entertainment, labs closed throughout the world as well. I don't really even need a site to back that up. For some research during COVID looked like this. You're just like trapped in a room by yourself, bored, zoomed out. Lab was shut down. You didn't go anywhere, and you had a lot of free time. And then I had a co-author that was that was in this situation, and it was great. And then for other people, COVID looked like this, right? And you're trying to get work done or be on a call while teaching your kids. These aren't my kids; it's like a stock photo, but and it was like tag team. My wife's also a researcher as well, so we're like going back and forth, trying to teach and just juggle and have some sort of sane resemblance. So by all of these changes, we would expect some changes in what was going on in MTurk usage or just online panel usage. So Scott and I realized, well, hey, we had been doing this survey for a couple of years of marketing academics. Let's do it one more time post-COVID and see if there's any changes going on. So we'd surveyed the marketing researchers at the top 150 business schools. We sent out about 1,700 emails, and we got 3 waves over time. And so it started February 2019 and then 2020. And then, of course, COVID happened right there. And then we followed up the following year as well. I should point out, this is not a panel. It's this, we're going back to this. I mean, in one sense, it's a panel going back to the same respondents, but it's not a panel in the marketing research sense where I'm able to track people over time. So there could be slight differences in who responds to the survey from one wave to the next. So just kind of take that in mind when I show you some of the data. We should have probably done that in retrospect. It would have taken, the different design of the study, so we would have known to control for that. But we got about 250 to 300 in each wave that we were doing this, so it had a decent response rate. 65% public school, 70% North America, so there is some diversity across there. We were heavily weighted in behavioral, so those know in marketing, there's probably 40% of marketing faculty and research are consumer behavior and behavioral, and they're using MTurk and things like that, whereas the other is strategy and quant marketing. So we had 17% quant, and then the rest of them are the strategy group. So there's kind of a mix. And we had a good mix of rank too, from assistant to all the way to chaired professors as well. And so I'm going to look at that and see how it changes by kind of rank or experience, if you will. And so we asked a lot of questions about their use and their perceptions of MTurk and their data collection habits. Okay, so the first kind of big thing, though, completely flat and unsurprising, or to me surprising, but completely flat and not too exciting, is we asked people about their MTurk use and just like how often were you using it. And we only looked at behavioral researchers. I mean, I could look at everybody here, but quant people aren't using it that much, so there's going to be some big fluctuations. So if you just look at the behavioral researchers who are really the target here, we just didn't see any big uptick after COVID. Now, part of that is we were already at 93%. So there wasn't a whole lot of increase. People and marketing, they were using this a lot. I mean, and you're probably going to have just random error, when you get close to that 5% anyway. So there wasn't a big increase. The number of studies, though, that people were posting, we thought this would go up a lot, right? Labs were closed, and we saw the opposite, a decrease after COVID. So COVID happens here, and we saw a significant decrease, or pretty close, marginally significant decrease after COVID. Now, this could, like I said, this could be because people just didn't have the time really to work on the research. It could be that, some universities, their funding dried up or was on hold during COVID. And so that slowed down some of the research. And so we didn't and we chopped this off at like people who did more than 15, which was the 95 percentile. Some people were saying they did more than 15 studies per month. There's a few outliers, but any way you slice it, we saw this decrease if you want to put in some of those big outliers. Right. So that was one big change. What do researchers think about data sources? So this was a big thing we were going into it because we wanted to know. People kept coming up to us saying, well, what do reviewers think about it? What are editors? What are the journals saying? And we would just kind of guess. And as a researcher, I was like, well, let's ask people and see what they say. Do people are they trusting MTurk? So first, we asked people. So we asked everyone, how do you perceive the quality of data obtained from the following sources? Okay, so they rated, and it was a 1 to 7 scale. So I probably should have the 7 up here and a 1 down here. And the student pool, you can see, is kind of in the midpoint of the scale. Non-students, immediately when you move away from students, they're like, oh, it must be higher quality because there's something weird about students. So I thought that was just kind of interesting. And I thought grad students, well, they seem more real in some sense, but nah, they're about the same as well. But you see, we saw a big decrease when you mentioned MTurk. Now, personally, like this is their perceptions. Personally, I always ask people, what would you trust more, a study that you saw that was run in the lab, or a study that you saw that was run on MTurk? And I would pick the MTurk one. Other people, so there's difference. But if you look at it on the whole, it sounds like people would trust the student sample more. But probably more important for us was this huge decrease we saw over time in trust towards MTurk. And I'll get back into that in just a little bit. You can compare that. Prolific was mentioned on here as well in the chat. So what do people think of Prolific? I think there is this belief or a perception that is more trustworthy, that's higher quality than MTurk. If I said, well, what about other crowdsourcing methods and other crowdsourcing platforms? I think they kind of group in with MTurk. The data looks pretty similar to that, so that doesn't really help out. But we see this decrease over time that's significant. But if I call it an online panel, people then trust it. Like, oh, okay. So this kind of goes against Jeremy's research and Chris, what they're saying is actually that the online panels seem to be lower quality if you put in some of these controls and everything there. But we can get into how we're measuring that. That's, and a different statement. But perception-wise, they do seem to be trusted more. Compare that to field data, panel data, scanner data, what we use in marketing a lot. We saw, okay, that we trust. For some reason, that feels more objective. But scanner data is just getting the raw data when you're scanning at the grocery store, right? And so there is no really that you're collecting this. It's more of a measure than a behavioral response. So you don't run into attention problems and things like that. Okay, so what researchers think about MTurk, though, is, like I mentioned, is changing over time. So we now zoom in and we'll just focus on MTurk. So what are people, not about the other panels, but we asked them, do MTurk workers pay attention? And we found that that's decreasing over time. People think that they're paying less attention. I worry that MTurk workers aren't who they claim to be. That seems to be an increasing problem over time as well. I question the validity of data on MTurk. Again, seems to be changing over time. Papers should not have all their data from MTurk. This is a kind of a question that kind of comes up in marketing a lot. That one is a little bit mixed over time. It is significantly different, but we don't see a linear relationship. And then the bot thing we just measured in the last 2 waves, and we see a kind of a marginal increase, but people were concerned with bots. Bots are a significant problem for MTurk studies, and I'll come back to that in just a second. And the other thing is it depends a lot on who we ask when we're talking about MTurk. So there was reviewers seemed to think that MTurk workers paid more attention than the editors and the AEs. Okay. And so that kind of got us on this path of, well, maybe there's something about familiarity and expertise, right? So the editors and AEs tend to be older, more advanced, higher rank, and probably have less experience with actually running the MTurk experiment. And their career, they've seen other things as well. And we know they might be less open to new things. So then we sliced it a little bit different. We said, okay, let's look at age and rank and the number of studies. So different measures to try to get at familiarity with MTurk. And what we consistently saw was this relationship between people who use it or have expertise or believe in it, have like familiarity with MTurk. They were more likely to think that it was a good source. Now, we don't know the causal direction, right? It could, if I believe in MTurk, I'm going to go use it. And so if I'm posting more studies, then I'm probably going to believe in it. But it's the same thing if we look at how old people are or their rank, so their experience in the field. So if I post more studies or if I'm, then I think MTurk workers pay more attention. And likewise, the older I get, it decreases over time. Okay, so and so over here, the number of studies, as I post more studies, I think I'm more likely to think MTurk workers aren't paying attention. Yeah, and one question is, how did I measure it? Reviewers versus editors? It was just self-reporting. So at the end of the study, I just asked, are you a reader, a reviewer? Are you on any ERBs? And are you an editor or an AE? So it was self-reporting. So a little bit messy, but all of those kind of are holding together. So this over here, I questioned the validity of MTurk. Same pattern that we're seeing here with familiarity. What's going on here? There's been a lot of there's been changes and from bots to other things, or bots or not bots, whatever it might be. I'll just use that for a shorthand. I also hear lots of stories from people. Oh, I heard TikTok had something to do with it, and I'm like, well, okay, that actually had something to do with Prolific, and so what happened with TikTok was this person, Sarah, posted about Prolific, and then she got 4 million views, and then 30,000 participants rated Prolific. And what do you know? There were a lot like her. They were all like 20-something females. And so Prolific had to respond and adjust their panel because people were doing studies and 90% of them would be female. It would just totally skew things. So those do happen. I think we need to pay attention to them. But that doesn't seem to be what's going on with the MTurk. But this happens even when you have large samples with 130,000 that's claimed on Prolific or 250 on MTurk, or the CloudResearch approved participants. I'm sure someone, Lieb can clarify, or someone else can clarify how many, but it seems like it's well over 65,000 of what that participant list. So even some of these big events, I kept mentioning bots, and I call them bots because that's kind of the word, but there really isn't any evidence that they are bots, and that there's a good paper showing that it's most likely humans. But this bot panic was something that happened 3-4 years ago, that it wasn't actually people behind it. But like I said, the Moss et al. Paper suggests that it's probably not by how people were responding to questions about eggplants and trash cans. So I encourage you to go check that out. But I think the big takeaway here is that the bot panic might have bred some distrust in MTurk and some questions, and that might be for the better, that we take a closer look. But it also might be changing perceptions and attention and it as well. And I think also what we're seeing is that researchers are using more attention checks over time. So we asked, are you using attention checks? So that's kind of the response, is like, well, people aren't paying attention. Let me use more of those. And they're using it through CloudResearch and as well as the approved participants list. We've seen an increase in those over time, using geolocations and other features of that are on CloudResearch. Okay, so I'm out of time here, so let me just quickly say 3 things. One, I think that we need to continue with disclosure. What we don't see, we see people, and this might have come up in the chat, we see people using the word MTurk, but there's a big difference from just using MTurk by itself and then using CloudResearch or some other tool to pre-screen who you're using, okay? And that's gonna be a very different look. So we need to be reporting in papers in our research if we're using CloudResearch or some other tool to filter what our attention checks are and things like that. I think also pre-screening is better than post-screening. So pre-screening is when you use an approved participant list, or you're using some mechanism to make sure you're getting, we'll just call it good participants for the sake of brevity right now. Post-screening is what a lot of people do though too, is where they try to, after the fact, clean out people who are not using. And that comes into a lot of problems as well. And that MTurk alone is probably just not enough. We need CloudResearch or Connect or Prolific, other sources, other ways, other filters to try to solve those problems. So with that, any thoughts, questions? Happy to answer them.
So when you ask your question about MTurk, did you qualify it at all? Did you talk about approval ratings or look at any differences across how they might be vetted, CloudResearch or anything else?
Yeah, Scott, no, we didn't. We just used MTurk. And that's something that's a good question that I think is we think about doing another wave of these, differentiating that and kind of taking my own advice to say there's MTurk and then there's MTurk with a approved participant list or with a CloudResearch filter or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
That helps.
There was another question in the chat. Can you explain what scanner data means?
Yeah. So scanner data is, again, a marketing thing. So we have marketing quant people. So, you go to the grocery store, you're at Kroger and you scan everything and that data goes into a database. And so a lot of marketing researchers will look at that scanner data. And so it's just pure, measurement, what the price was when you bought it, what was bought with it, the basket size, all those variables. So it's a behavioral measure in that it's real behavior, but it's not, respondents answering scales. So it's just kind of a benchmark or a way to kind of compare where that's at. And so, yeah, Felipe, about the post cleaning measures. Yeah, I think the big issue with post screening is that it allows for a lot of researcher degrees of freedom. And this is where it's important to pre-register studies so that what is your post-screening strategy going to be, that you're not screening after the fact to confirm hypotheses or to what we call p-hacking, where you're iteratively, removing outliers. And so setting that, if you're going to do post-screening, I think it's important to set that screening criteria ahead of time and pre-register it and say how you're going to eliminate attention to people who are not paying attention, because it becomes subjective. Like, how long is too long? Oh, they took too long. Oh, well, some people they took too short. Well, how short? And so having that set ahead of time.
And this is going to be a business perspective of some of the topics that have been discussed previously. And thanks, Lee and CloudResearch, for asking me to speak at this conference on a topic that I've been thinking about for the last 8 years, and that the findings from a recent case fraud study that I helped to conduct crystallize my thoughts on the negative impact of automation in the research process. And real quickly, I think Lee kind of covered these significant aspects here. I've spent the last 45 years in market research. The last 25 years, I actually spent it directly developing global panels for TNS, Kantar, and Ipsos. Currently, I'm a member of Case for Quality, a not-for-profit organization that works with brands to improve the quality of online sample. We recently produced the results of a groundbreaking study on online fraud, which I will highlight in parts of this presentation. I was also a member of the ARF Foundation's of Quality initiative that helped outline the key quality online measures, and have also been one of the co-authors of the SMR list of questions for the buyers of online sample. Currently, in addition to doing the pro bono work with Case, I also advise startups on viable online sampling strategies that focus on data quality. So how has automation impacted the research process? Back in 1996, it was evident to many of us that moving from mail panel sampling, which was really one of the key ways of generating samples for brands, to online sampling, could help accelerate the existing research process. We went from conducting single concept tests that ran in 5 months. So from beginning to end, a traditional concept test done on a mail panel would take 5 months, to online conducting 45 concept tests that we would run over a weekend for a single client. So big cost savings were envisioned, and they were delivered as the price of an interview got reduced by over 75%. Key research processes were optimized and in unfortunately many cases eliminated in that quest. Automated web tools have also played a direct part into some of the fraud issues, as we will see later in this presentation. And finally, one of the things that the internet helped to do was erase the barriers to entry into the panel research business, which up until that time, back in the 90s, had been dominated by only a handful of research companies. So a quick history of online fraud. It's been around since the inception of the internet. Right from the beginning, we were being hit by fraudsters. The fraudsters targeted the incentive pots, which is where the incentive funds were held. These are incentive funds that we use to reward survey takers. These fraudsters can be individuals or organizations who maintain various fictitious accounts. Originally, they actually could hack directly into the incentive pots or trick the early generation of survey systems into thinking lots of surveys had been completed. Today, these bad actors have to actually complete the surveys before getting their rewards. As a result, scalable automation tools can be employed to complete many surveys today with reduced effort. Talking about the case fraud study that I mentioned earlier, in 2021 at Case for Quality, we decided to focus on the fraud issue because there was a dearth of information on the topic. We employed 8 prominent representative sample suppliers to participate, and they did not know they were participating in our study. We did not want to tip them off and know that they were going to be a part of a fraud detection study. And we asked them to give us 500 completes each for a total of 4,000. It was US Nat Rep, and the LOI was 10 minutes. We employed 4 fraud detection firms to monitor fraud. And I'll say right here, the CloudResearch was not part of this test. We did not know about CloudResearch when we conducted this study. And this study was funded by 8 major brands. Some of the key findings were somewhat surprising. The suspected fraudulent responders that were flagged ranged, depending on the detection firm, somewhere between 5 to 10%. Large amount of data quality issues were identified, making almost a quarter of the sample not usable. In the end, we had to remove close to 40% of the total sample. And we noted that research results would have been impacted if we had not removed them. So they actually changed the results of the survey. The recommendations that came out of this were to use pre-survey fraud detection, but also to do some thorough data cleaning and scrubbing at the back end. Our great surprise came when we actually looked at the results from a vendor's measure that tracks the frequency that unique devices, and here unique devices are equal to respondents, were accessing the surveys in the prior 24-hour, accessing surveys, other surveys. This slide is directly from the case study. And what we learned is that by creating a unique ID, and that's what these detection firms do to track in-survey duplication, fraud detection firms can also track how often they see ID within their own ecosystem traffic, meaning their clients' traffic that they're servicing. One of the detection firms provides this data at a device level for suppliers to filter out excessive survey takers if they so choose. It's optional. And what we saw in our study sample is that a quarter of the sample had entered into 25 different surveys in the preceding 24 hours. This includes respondents who told us they had not participated in any surveys prior to our study. The average across the entire sample was, close to 22 surveys entered, which I think is a fairly high amount. This obviously raised an alarm. The four of us at CASE are researchers and know that respondents taking numerous surveys, many on similar categories, in one sitting or in a single day, can produce confusing and possibly questionable results that impact the results of a study and in turn, the recommended business decisions that come out of it. When we consulted the detection firms, thinking that there may be, there might be something wrong with their measures to determine if that was normal, 3 out of 4 of them said that that's what they had seen over the recent years. It wasn't an anomaly. And in fact, they see that that type of volume of frequency across all geographies. So we're going to look at 4 key developments that changed the industry. First, the inception of online panels. Next, the use of survey respondent routers that help optimize the use of respondents. Then the use of programmatic sampling and the buying of sample. And then I'll wrap it up by looking at the impact of survey taking tools. Recruiting and incenting being of the internet is the first innovation, and among many things, it helped eliminate mail cost in panel development. The 2 pioneers here were NFO and Harris. These are research companies that actually don't exist anymore. I was at NFO back in 1996, and I was in charge of developing our first online panel. Mail panels require a significant initial investment and depend on ongoing investments to recruit and maintain their members. As I said previously, by eliminating large mail costs, this opened the door for everyone to have a panel, and today everyone apparently claims that they have a panel. Pre-internet incentive fulfillment was actually done via cash and check in the mail. Post-internet, there is an online redemption process that does not require a mailing address. And in fact, you'll note most, if not 95, 98% of all online, so-called online panels, they don't actually collect a mailing address. And there's reasons for that, which I can speak to afterwards. Prior to the internet, the mailing address was actually an effective validation that the member lived at the address where we sent the check. Today, only an email validation occurs. Email address validation occurs when someone joins a survey site, which may have the effect of encouraging someone to get multiple addresses to gain more rewards. Routers. Routers became a reality around 2005. They were introduced by OTX and Greenfield, and they helped optimize the use of respondents by allowing respondents who had completed or had been disqualified from their survey to actually do more surveys. The way it works is that by looking at the respondent profile, the demographics, et cetera, and the survey requirements for all the surveys available, the router creates a match of the best surveys and maximizes the revenue that's generated by that respondent by offering those surveys that fit their profile. This approach also eased the path of allowing new recruits to enter into surveys the moment they completed what would be a very thin profiling survey. Also, two issues that this innovation helped perpetuate: no limits on survey taking. So meaning a person could complete a survey right now and be introduced to 7 survey opportunities immediately afterwards, and self-selection via survey walls. I believe that only recently have fraud detection mechanisms been inserted into the more public router processes, and that has been because of the rising trend of questionable and bad sample. Let's talk a little bit about programmatic sampling. This was an innovation introduced by Lucid originally in around 2012, and it's been mimicked by the entire industry. And it's helped open the door to the marketplace concept, where suppliers and clients can connect automatically to find the best and cheapest samples. The benefits are pretty obvious. No manual bidding. Previously, people used to get on the phone and talk to 10 different suppliers. That's no longer the case. And it actually opens the door for a wider pool of vendors, to be available almost instantaneously. This has revolutionized the sample selection and buying process, and as it is now API driven versus some cumbersome manual selection. Of course, there are consequences that this innovation has produced. Since everything is automated, it's actually rare for a human expert. And there used to be human experts that oversaw the sampling process for every project back in the early days, back in the 90s. But in today's environment, it's rare to have a human expert oversee the selection and fulfillment process for potential quality issues. Most of the attention is actually placed on maximizing profitability. How can we get these respondents to actually complete surveys so that we can collect revenue from the completion. All suppliers can and do participate, so it is usually very difficult to determine the actual origin of any respondent, since many respondents are on multiple panels. It's rare where you have, a respondent only belonging to one panel because of the interchange across all the different suppliers in this commercial environment. It also encourages the recycling of respondents by suppliers to generate more revenue, as there are no survey limits. It's helped lower the price of sample due to many factors, including competitive bidding, but also recycling of sample. But it's interesting because when you talk to sample suppliers today, sample suppliers that participate in these exchanges, the first thing that they'll tell you is that they never provide their best sample to these exchanges, and that you should actually purchase sample directly from them to get the best quality and price. In the end, I think this is a tool that it's for maximizing the monetization of respondent traffic. And quality is probably a side consideration. The survey taking tools, these are the so-called bots that I think were referred to in the previous presentation. And these tools help automate and expedite the completion of surveys. And they've been around most likely since 2005, when the first tools for automatic software testing were developed in the tech industry to aid in the agile development process. These are fairly powerful tools. There are many more than the ones that I've listed there in the slide. And with the help of a human, because a lot of these tools require some human to kind of pre-program them for a specific survey. They can allow respondents or click farms to analyze and complete many surveys quickly and concurrently, avoiding disqualification traps. These tools are also able to emulate all types of web and mobile browsers and can be adapted easily to take surveys. They are very readily available on the web. Go out there and Google, automated, software testing tools, and you'll see. Detection of bots, which these are, as they're referred to in this industry, at the time of the test was tricky. None of the detection firms detected the participation of bots, and we believe that there were probably bots as part of the study, because we had, and this may sound crazy, but we had some respondents that made it through the fraud detection checks, and also the data quality checks, and the data indicated that they had entered into over 100 surveys prior to ours. And as most, I don't know, but the average LOI for a commercial survey is 20 minutes, and you can do the math and try to figure out how somebody can do 20, 30, or 40 surveys in a day. One last slide that I hope summarizes the current industry situation. Also this is also from a recent case presentation that was done at Quirks in July. This is a diagram of the current online sample ecosystem. You have the different types of sample suppliers, consumer panels, loyalty providers, affiliate networks, etc., with massive interchange of sample among each other. So between these different types of respondent pools, there's a lot of exchange of sample that's going on to begin with. The active web traffic from their members is what becomes the day-to-day sample pool that services the surveys that are done from these sources. This traffic is routed through the exchanges via API, pairing respondent to the survey, thereby quickly and efficiently monetizing the survey taking device. And then, of course, they are recycled to do more surveys. The little devils on the chart there in this schematic highlight all the different points where fraud can easily enter into the ecosystem. So on top of this, you have a bunch of other compounding factors that make it difficult to write this problematic situation. There's no exclusivity of respondents because they're all part of multiple sources. There's no validation of respondents, literally no validation. And there are no limits on survey taking. And on top of that, there's very little transparency. I think part of the issue is that our industry, this industry, really has no agreed upon evidence-based standards that are related to quality. Everything is proprietary and opaque. And at each point in time, when these innovations were introduced, and at the time they were introduced, there were no standards, no one asked what would be the consequences other than ensuring that it could lower prices at the time and the delivery time, and also increase profit. It's obvious to me that the industry has some work to do here to help understand what exactly is going on, what its impacts are on the research being conducted, and if it's even possible at this stage to change, as the current prevailing sample business model requires respondents to take many, many surveys daily. Thanks. That's it. Questions?
Thank you, Ephraim. Yeah, if anyone has any questions for Ephraim or about data quality in general, we have a few more minutes left to the session.
I have a question, Ephraim.
Sure.
Yeah, very interesting presentation. Things that our team at CloudResearch has been familiar with and talking about. So there's certainly a lot of big problems. I'm just curious, if you had to prioritize solutions, what you think some of the most effective might be. It's clear, like you just said, that a lot of this ecosystem depends on lots of people completing probably too many surveys, and some of those are fraudulent and some of those are just professional sorts of people. So if you had to prioritize some solutions, what might be at the top of your list?
I think one thing you have to consider here is, the clients to these particular surveys or large brands that are conducting, a massive amount of surveys. I think it's going to depend on what they're willing to pay for sample, because there's absolutely no doubt that the cost of sample would go up. But the first thing I would do, there has to be some form of validation. There has to be some identity validation. The mail address validation was very effective throughout the time it existed. In fact, the panels that I ran, we continued to do mail validation all the way through 2006. And it proved fairly effective. The other solution, I think it's not even solution. The other investigation that I think is required is, what is the impact of having respondents completing numerous surveys on in a single sitting or in a day on the actual data. So those are two things that I would look at, immediately. Fortunately for me, I'm retired and I'm no longer in the industry. So this is something that you guys are going to have to do in the industry. Is going to have to do, and it's going to require some work.
I have a question. It just seems so. First of all, thank you for the talk. It was really fascinating, and especially to see the historical development of some of these issues. But it just seems that there's such a disconnect between some of the different presentations that we saw today. On the one hand, people perceive these panels as being extremely, extremely reliable, right?
But who's that? Who sees them as extremely reliable today?
Well, in the previous talk, it was academia, but I could tell you from speaking to people in the industry, it's also vast majority of people in the industry. I mean, tell me if your experience is different, but I find that the percentage of people who actually think that there are data quality problems, it's increasing, right? The awareness of the problems is increasing, especially with some of the work that you're doing a case. But I would say 90% of end clients, brands, right? They don't know that there's a problem. But on the other hand, right? So there's like this perception of high reliability and data quality, but on the other hand, as your study showed, right, 40% of the data has to be thrown out. So how does that disconnect occur? Is it marketing? Is it just like a lack of interest? What's happening?
I think one of the things that's happened is in most of the large corporations, the investment that they were making into the research groups, the large research groups that actually conduct this type of research, they've been hit hard in terms of budgets. So what's happened is in many of those companies, the more experienced and the more expensive research, the more senior researchers are gone from those organizations. So there is no history in those organizations. The way I learned when I started out in this business is I had a couple of mentors in the companies that I worked at, and they told me what the things that were right and wrong. So a lot of the companies don't have any sort of history. So they don't know how to ask any of these questions. Now, I'll have to say that as a result of the case for quality, of which this study was a part of, and the brands, 8 brands funded it, that they are very, very aware of this issue. And it's a little bit problematic, I think, for those brands in that they've been spending, millions of dollars conducting research, to using these sources, and they have to kind of pivot now and figure out how what they can do on their on their side to be able to alter the situation. So they can't just come out and declare this the situation a total bust. So I think there's a political problem there